Hello, my name is J. Drake Hamilton, and I'm a geographer who specialized in climate change at Dartmouth College, George Washington University, and the University of Minnesota. I'm a climate scientist. Today, I serve as the Science Policy Director for Fresh Energy. Fresh Energy is a nonprofit that is based on science and data and is focused on cutting carbon. Our mission is to shape and drive realistic, visionary energy and climate policies that benefit all. We are collectively speeding Minnesota's transition to a clean energy economy. I'm delighted to join you for Solve Climate by 2030. I was asked to focus on one particular action taken statewide or at the electric utility level. Electrification is my choice. Electrification can produce cost-effective emissions reductions that provide business and innovation opportunities and improve human health. If you decide to act to increase electrification, you want to know what you should be tracking. Has your state or has your electric utility minimized fossil fuel use and reduced millions of tons of greenhouse gas emissions through electrification? If so, you are winning. By that I mean moving to electricity for heating water and space heating in our buildings and aggressively increasing the number of electric vehicles. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warned us. Nobody on this planet is going to be untouched by the impacts of climate change. But to stay in line with the targets laid out in the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement, the U.S. and the world need to decrease emissions 45% below 2010 levels by 2030, or else the atmosphere could hit 1.5 degrees Celsius of increase. We need to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050, known as deep decarbonization. The U.S. and indeed the world is reducing its greenhouse gas emissions too slowly to help the worst effects of climate change. Virtually every credible study on deep decarbonization agrees on the basic of a strategy to get there. The heart of this strategy is first cleaning up the power grid, which is currently responsible for 28% of the country's greenhouse gas emissions. It must be rapidly transitioned to zero carbon sources like renewable energy. But concurrently, two of the biggest sources of greenhouse gases, the transportation and building sectors, must switch over to run on that zero carbon power. The transportation system contributes now 29% of U.S. emissions and is almost entirely powered by gas and diesel. It must transition to electric vehicles to the extent possible. The building sector contributes another 29% of U.S. emissions, and these are now frequently heated by natural gas or a little less commonly by oil. They must also be transitioned to electric heating and electric heating of hot water to the extent possible. The expert chorus supporting electrification has been getting stronger and louder because electrification is the cheapest option for decarbonizing buildings. So we recommend embracing electricity in buildings and moving beyond natural gas in buildings. And important, technology in fighting climate change. Electric heat pumps result in lower carbon dioxide emissions, 31% lower than from buildings that use fossil fuel boilers across the U.S. On average, electric vehicles release 31% less emissions per kilometer than gas-powered cars, and heat pumps were responsible for 35% lower emissions than fossil fuel burners that run on gas or oil. The answer is clear. To reduce carbon emissions, we should choose electric cars and heat pumps over fossil-fueled alternatives. In Minnesota, since 2007, we've had the Next Generation Energy Act, which sets an economy-wide goal of at least 30% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2025 and at least 80% reduction by 2050 across our entire economy. But we have no plan to meet these economy-wide goals. But I'll start with the bright news. Since this bipartisan law was passed in 2007, the electricity sector has exceeded the challenge. Renewable electricity was only 7% of our power back in 2006, but in just 10 years, it grew to 25% of our portfolio. Burning coal to produce power took a free fall. Coal was 62% of our power prior to 2007, and today it is less than 38% of our electricity. During that 10 years, a mere 10 years, Minnesota grew 59,000 clean energy jobs, and they exceeded the state average wage by 42%. 40% of those good clean energy jobs were located in greater Minnesota. So Minnesota was celebrated by President Obama in the White House for figuring out how to cut carbon via smart bipartisan policies and business leadership. At our first 10 years, the state's economy, our gross state product, grew to 29%. The gross state product grew 29%, while our electricity rate of emissions decreased by 29%. That means much less carbon pollution and much greater money in the economy. But in the transportation sector, Minnesota is actually moving in the wrong direction. Other states are backsliding too. Transportation now just incrementally produces more greenhouse gases than any other sector, more than power, for example. And did you know 70% of vehicles sold in Minnesota are now SUVs or pickup trucks? These are factors that increase the emissions from the Minnesota transportation sector. And maybe you have noticed that gas prices in Minnesota are now at record lows. This will also dampen the transition away from gas-fueled cars to the much more efficient electric vehicles. In the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area, CO2 emissions from driving increased from 1990 to 2017, increased an astounding 60%. Driving emissions have been rising more quickly than has population growth. Per person CO2 emissions have increased 16% from transmission. Many individuals, agencies, companies, and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz are noticing the need for much more ambition. So let's look first at the climate goals of some of the companies headquartered in Minnesota. These are outstanding. Several corporations have net zero carbon emissions goals by 2050. It is the goal of Cargill, it is the goal of Ecolab, and it is the goal of Best Buy. Look at the Target Corporation headquartered in Minnesota. In 2017, Target set a goal to power 25% of Target stores throughout the country with renewable electricity by 2025. But last summer, in the summer of 2019, Target found out that they were already at 23% renewables. They knew they needed to move much faster. So in the summer of 2019, they reset their goal dramatically. Its goal is now to, in all of their stores in the United States, to reach 100% renewable electricity by 2030. And look for a moment at our largest power company, Xcel Energy in Minnesota. The company will close all of their coal-fired power plants by the year 2030 at the latest. Therefore, they will run their energy system without burning any coal. Xcel announced in 2019 It will reduce carbon emissions in all of the 8 states it sells electricity. And it will reduce it by 80% emissions by 2030, and will provide all customers with 100% carbon-free electricity by 2050. That makes Minnesota's largest power company, Xcel Energy, the biggest climate action leader in the United States. To restart Minnesota on our economy-wide reductions needed throughout our economy, Minnesota's McKnight Foundation funded a fascinating study. It was completed by Vibrant Clean Energy, and it's called Minnesota's Smarter Grid: Pathways Toward a Clean, Reliable, and Affordable Transportation and Energy System. The results. The report shows that Minnesota can achieve its 2050 greenhouse gas reduction goals across the top 3 emitting sectors: the building sector, the energy sector, and the transportation sector. Minnesota would also provide reliable energy at affordable prices. Continuing our state's progress on clean energy will not only allow us to tackle climate change, but will significantly reduce air pollution, increase human health, and boost our economy. It would triple the number of energy jobs by 2050. So think about that, a 300% growth in energy sector employment, 50,000 jobs in wind and solar energy, along with a 30% decrease in the cost per kilowatt hour of electricity. Now, to decarbonize the Minnesota economy 80% by 2050, compared with 2005 levels, what needs to happen? The electricity sector must decarbonize by 91%, while serving new heating and transportation demands as those sectors electrify. Electrification includes a large expansion of commercial and residential water and space heat pumps. Along with that, it requires aggressive energy efficiency investments. It would deliver both jobs, about 20,000 more full-time jobs, and increased revenue to the state. With this, households will save each year on energy spending between $600 a year and $1,200 a year. Now let's turn back to Xcel Energy. For Collegeville, Minnesota, Xcel is the electric and natural gas supplier. So hone in on electric and Xcel Energy. Track the number of jobs, the price of power, the number of tons of greenhouse gas emissions achieved for Xcel. Xcel is the national leader in transforming their energy system. Summarizing what Xcel already shows, that the Minnesota study has revealed that is possible for every other utility as well in Minnesota. 3 points I'm going to focus on. We could retire every coal plant in our state by 2030. We could never build another fossil fuel natural gas plant, and we would still meet our energy demands, but through clean, renewable energy. We need to update the planning frequency from the current situation of every 2 years the utility updates their planning. They should be updating it every year to capture the changing economics and technologies that can more readily be included in the evolution of the energy system. This study shows that by 2050, 89% of the light-duty transportation vehicles, the cars and light trucks in Minnesota, would be electric vehicles. For our existing building, the lion's share of all our buildings already exist. We need to retrofit them. Those with old boiler furnaces and old water heaters, replace them with efficient heat pump alternatives. Replace heating water, electric resistance heat, and that running on natural gas, but instead should be powered by 3 times more efficient heat pump water heaters. What about new construction? We have to get new construction running on electricity from the get-go, rather than on natural gas, using air source, cold weather heat pumps for space heating, and the very efficient heat pumps for water heating. We need to educate on the value of electrification with respect to, we need to educate on the value of electrification with respect to emissions reduction, and we need your help with that. We need to retire the coal-fired power plants in Minnesota as rapidly as possible. I said no coal-fired power plants are necessary after 2030, but we have to make sure that happens. Minnesota Power in the northern part of the state now is on the hook, and if it doesn't change its plans, will run the only remaining coal-burning power plant in Minnesota after 2030. It is called the Boswell Plant. It's located in Cohasset, Minnesota, next door to Grand Rapids, Minnesota. And we need to decarbonize generation across the state. We would build at least 2,000 megawatts of wind by 2025, getting to 10,000 megawatts by 2050. We would install another 1,000 megawatts of rooftop solar by 2030 and build over 2,000 megawatts of utility-scale solar PV by 2030 in Minnesota and 10,000 megawatts of utility-scale solar by 2050. So, we've shown we can electrify the economy, running much more of it on clean electricity in our homes, all of our businesses, all of our buildings, and in transportation. The answer is clear. To reduce carbon emissions, we should choose electric cars and heat pumps over fossil-fueled alternatives. We must all do education, organization, and activism across our states and move faster toward replacing burning natural gas and oil that now heat most buildings and heat our hot water, replace it with zero emissions electricity. And we must accelerate greatly the choice of electric vehicles and including electric pickup trucks over vehicles that burn gasoline and diesel. In our state or your state, you can track the number of heat pumps and the number of electric vehicles and make public the number of electrification substitutes for fossil fuel uses. Remember, we pay attention to what we track. I recommend you check out these success stories on our Fresh Energy website at fresh-energy.org. Also, follow me on Twitter. I'm at, one word, J. Drake Hamilton. Remember this: we are the healthiest, the wealthiest, the best educated, and the best connected generation in all of human history. In 2020, we need to be able to say we did everything we could to stop climate change, and it worked. It turns out that the most significant issue for our generation can be our biggest economic opportunity. Thanks you all so much.
At this moment in time, this is referred to in our Anishinaabe teachings as the time of the seventh fire, when we're told that we will have a choice between two paths. One path is well-worn and scorched, and the other is green. And so what does that mean? It means that, the fastest growing energy sources in the world are renewables. In order to get to renewables, though, you got to start doing the right thing. In other words, here in northern Minnesota, we have a little group on the White Earth Reservation called 8 Fire Solar that is rocking a solar thermal. In Minnesota, it's cold in the winter. Cold in the winter, but it's also sunny. And so take a look, the future is arriving. So we're just south of the border, and we have been making solar thermal panels here. I'm Winona the water protector, that's me. And here's Ronnie Chilton, and he is the guy who makes this rock.
We are on, close to the White Earth Reservation, a new solar manufacturing production facility in Ponsford, Minnesota. In the process of reorganizing our manufacturing facility. We haven't done that before, so we got to do it the right way the first time. I'm gonna put these jigs together where anybody can make them and they'll be right.
Okay, let's show you how it happens, right?
It's pretty much all aluminum and polyiso styrofoam. That's what our solar panels consist of.
Then we realized that if you actually want to heat the north, you gotta make a lot of solar panels, not like 10. You gotta make like hundreds, thousands of solar panels. We bought this from REAL, Rural Renewable Energy Alliance. The stuff comes in here, there's a lot of cutting, really loud, dangerous cutting things.
I'm the inventory specialist here at Fire Solar. I take inventory of the panels we have that are going out and how much we make.
And Nick graduated, what, 2 years ago from Circle of Life's valedictorian. Circle of Life School here on the reservation. This is his first big job. There's this thing, this giant sucking thing that holds a glass, right?
Our glass lifter.
And then this thing is, what's this thing here?
That's our glass washer.
Glass does go through there, right? So these guys, like this guy here, he's the master, runs a sugar bush, plus he runs a wild rice processing mill. So these guys have spent most of their lives tinkering with equipment to make local economies work. And then they have figured out here in a way to produce it for our community. And we're just getting started. Just to be clear, how many solar panels have you guys made so far?
30.
This is the best for solar. So when it's like this, super cold, super sunny, which is northern Minnesota. It's reflection off of that snow, combined with the sun and the crystals in the air make solar energy more efficient in the middle of winter. Isn't that interesting? And then all the people that live in this housing project are really low income. The tribe is basically paying their heating bill. You know, just a huge amount of duress in these communities, and so we negotiate with the tribal housing program and put them on the houses, the solar panels and the murals. So the solar panel glass is made locally, which is cool. And then it's manufactured here. John is starting to talk to people. John got trained a couple times on solar, both installation of thermal.
It takes the sun's energy from the south-facing wall of your home. Just basically takes the sun, the energy that the sun shines on the south-facing wall, and puts it into your home, much like a window would. Yeah, it's a different variety on a different technology, a bit more low-tech, making it more accessible for people, but a lot more reasonable as far as price. Structure in this region, their energy demand is only about 1/3 for electricity and over half for heat, and that's a typical structure in this region.
These panels absorb, they have an absorber on the inside, and that collects the heat, and it goes through channels on the inside of aluminum and polyiso, and that kind of directs the heat in an even flow. This glass is smooth on this side and dimpled on the other side, and that refractures the light on the inside, so it absorbs more. They're hot, they're warm, they're good. The way we have them mounted vertically, it can reflect light off the snow as well, so it's especially good for up here up north.
In the time of climate crisis, the whole world is trying to figure out how to cut carbon emissions. Here in Minnesota, we're trying to figure out how to permit a whole new pipeline that'll create more carbon. Enbridge's Line 3 represents adding 50 new coal-fired power plants to our energy infrastructure. The $7 billion that Enbridge is spending on its 915,000 barrel a day tar sands pipeline could be better spent. For $7 billion, you could buy 580 2-megawatt wind turbines, install 716,000 solar systems of 5 kilowatts each. We didn't leave the Stone Age because we ran out of rocks. It's time for the energy transition. Today we waste over 60% of our energy in inefficient systems, from combustion engines to long-distance power lines and old coal generation. How about we move on? After all, Denmark passed the 50% renewable mark in 2019 and plans more wind than ever, putting up 2 and 3 megawatt turbines. Windy place, nice country. And so I just want to say, Denmark, thank you for your leadership. And one day, the windiest state in the United States, North Dakota, will also have wind turbines. We can pray for that. So while Denmark is rocking the wind, the Department of Energy estimates that wind power from tribal lands could easily satisfy 30% of US demand, and solar production could generate enough energy to power the country 2 times over. This is Winona LaDuke. Thank you for joining us. We hope to come to you with some frequency to share with you what's going on in the North Country. Let's move on to the next economy. That's one we can all be happy with. www.honorearth.org. We wish.
And I hope to not be interrupted by my children, my dog, the mailman, or any of those things. But this is real life, as you all know, so that might happen. I am really pleased to be able to share with you this evening a little bit about the organization where I work as a model of a climate solution and how we think about climate solutions. And so I'm going to be running through a little presentation with some sound and some videos in it, as well as just my own words as well. So I'm going to put it into presentation mode, and Corey, if you can tell me if that's what you see, that would be great. Great. I'm getting a thumbs up from Corey. Cool. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to open it up with a short video to give you a sense of the feeling of how we do things in my organization.
I close my eyes and envision the world where the air in my lungs is pure,
where the waters that give us life are clean for all,
where the sea levels are steady and the storms have calmed,
where the green and economy is putting green back into my school,
back into the whistling fields on our farms, back into my town,
where the signatures on bills and laws are composed of our youth,
workers, tribes, and those who've been oppressed. I see the world where our hands unite instead of fight,
where students can be inside classrooms instead of protesting outside of them.
The world where my neighborhood is thriving, where the prairie is thriving, the island people are thriving.
I open my eyes and set to create that world.
In business, elevating the sustainability and unleashing the possibilities.
Cutting the pollution and putting growth in climate solutions. Creating community with UN negotiations and a cross-country teacher collaboration.
Where friends organize, go on strike, governize, innovate, disrupt, and go to school.
Where coworkers have honest conversations to grieve and admit the severity of the climate crisis.
We envision a world where ice caps are not melting.
Where climate change education is normalized in the classroom.
Where people of color and people on the front lines of the climate movement are heard.
Where the representatives of the offending class are voted out of office.
We envision a world where we have 100% renewable energy.
Where animals are happy and healthy.
Where youth are empowered to act on climate change.
We envision a world where we are thriving in an equitable and resilient future.
We are the climate generation.
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 We are the climate
generation.
Generation.
We are the climate generation.
So hopefully you got a little bit of a sense of how our organization talks about and thinks about this issue of climate change. We are positive and solutions focused in our communications and in the work we do. And we focus on a number of important audiences, which I'll dig a little bit into. We were founded by polar explorer Will Steger and his story. And this idea of story and personal narrative is something that is in the DNA of the work we do, and we believe that everyone has a story to tell, and that it is one of the most important tools that we have in terms of solving this problem when we can share it with others. And so to start off, I wanted to tell you briefly my story, and that is that I was raised here in the beautiful northern parts of Minnesota. I spent a lot of time on the shores of the Great Lake, Gitchigumi, Lake Superior. I grew up in St. Paul during the school year, went to an inner city urban high school, found that the value of diverse communities and people and thoughts and perspectives at an early age, and was raised in a home that saw this importance. I come from Norwegian lefse, Swedish meatballs, and Lithuanian latkes. So a diverse background of people that are run through my veins. And I do this work because I love my family, I love my state, I love winter, and I see the value and beauty of all the different communities and people that live here now and have been here before, many of us that came here before. And that's my story. And hopefully I will inspire some of you to think about your story today as well. Our organization's mission is to empower individuals in their communities to engage in solutions to climate change. And we work with, as I mentioned, a variety of different audiences to do that. We see a lot of value in this diversity of constituents that we reach out to. Many organizations specifically focus on policymakers or specifically focus on teachers. And we think that this sort of nexus node, when we're reaching all these multiple audiences in the same place or in the same sphere, creates a much larger impact and also a lot of exciting opportunities for synergy. And so some of the big goals that come out with that is this idea that we need to mainstream climate change education across all subjects, normalize conversations about climate change, embolden leadership of influentials to act, and elevate this moral imperative in a future built on innovation through youth voices. And I'll sort of pull out those pieces throughout a discussion of the different groups that we're working with. So this idea of mainstreaming climate change education across all subjects, we've been working with teachers across the country for the last 15 years, training them in climate change education, not just in the science classroom, but also in the social studies and language arts classrooms. And we were recently quite happy to see that there is evidence now showing that not only is education important from a learning perspective and a preparation perspective, but that it actually has been being seen to link to driving down carbon emissions. And another really great tool for us to pull out in our toolbox when we're talking about it, but also something that we'd love to explore a little bit more. Our goals in our education program is really to build this knowledge, but also the confidence to bring climate change into all subject areas, to help teachers deal with the adversity and challenges they have and give them support. And since 2006, we've reached teachers across the country. We have resources available and through them really reached over 1 million students. And so this is a huge piece of this work, a cornerstone of solutions that we see is training teachers and who are working with this generation that we know is taking on a huge challenge that is before them. Normalizing conversations about climate change and emboldening leadership. We work with communities extensively throughout the state of Minnesota and more in other parts of the country as well, as we're asked to mentor partners and other individuals in this. We do this in a variety of different ways. This is the foundation of this really comes from this knowledge that although a large majority of Americans believe that climate change is happening, only 36% of them are actually talking about it. And this disconnect, this spiral of silence that Yale calls it, is really alarming, but also an amazing opportunity for us. And once again, to go back to that idea of story, to really talk about climate change. So we do this in a variety of different ways. We offer a Talk Climate Institute yearly, and in partnership, we were lucky to just recently work with St. John St. Ben's to put one of these on. They're very locally based. Their focus is on developing your own climate story and then bringing it out into the community by sharing it with family, with decision makers, with other people in your sphere where you are an influential yourself. We also have worked very closely with Three Rivers Park District over the last 3 years to help put on convenings that are in very specified to the place where they're held. For example, Gale Woods Farm, the focus was really on agriculture and the stories that come out of our connection to the land in that respect. We also have thought and worked a lot on thinking about how to share that story and having others share their stories, and are very proud to share that we will be releasing a book on Earth Day called Eyewitness, which features Minnesota's voices on climate change. And stay tuned for more information on that as well. But we saw Terry Tempest Williams' example of doing something very similar to this around the Utah Wilderness Act, and were inspired of this idea of literary activism and the role that the arts and spoken word can play in this space. So once again, normalizing conversations, bringing it into our spaces. And then, and as I mentioned, you know, emboldening the leadership of people that are influentials. We may think of corporate business leaders as being in that space. We might think of our decision makers, the elected officials that we have being in that space. We don't often, I think about things like artists being people as well, but we recognize the important role that these people that we look up to, these writers and musicians, also as important influentials. And we're very pleased and excited to be able to mentor a number of Minnesota musicians as well as national musicians to put on a show recently in the fall called Band Together, where we coach them to tell their climate story while they sing music. And it was fascinating because these leaders, these real leaders in the arts space, had no problem getting up there and putting on their show and music, but the thought of telling a story and how they were connected to climate change was like terrifying for them. But I wanted to share just a quick reel of that experience and what that looked like.
We stand shoulder to shoulder, we stand side by side. We stand shoulder to shoulder around the fire.
When it comes to climate change, we cannot wait for government to act or legislation to force our hands and habits. We can't wait for our neighbors to start making changes to make them ourselves.
They went away, a sick in the cold. Acting okay, but I'm really afraid. Don't want them to know.
We are all here today because, as a human family, we recognize that there is a calling greater than any one of us individually. This is a moment in time that is bigger than political parties and divisions, that is bigger than just economic transition, that is bigger than fossil fuels.
I've always wanted to open a show by saying, I'm a tree hugger. There's something so humbling and so magical about nature.
I had a dream. I was cold in the rain. Yeah, I would wait for the sun to come up.
What I do know is that I don't want to be silent anymore, even though that is a very easy thing to do. But I want to learn about climate change myself. I want to learn what I can do, and I want to help connect people.
I was raised with the understanding that we shared the space and place where we lived with all sorts of other creatures and beings and energies.
This talking is a trap. Action in a maze. I'm sinking down, 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 down.
Connected by a chain, carved from one piece of bone. But in order to be clear, water must run.
And we can save our Mother Earth.
Be the change you want to see.
I think that the first step to a better world is just to be able to imagine a better world.
Oh, we call home.
So thanks for watching. I think it's important to be creative in this work and to think about places and people that we might not necessarily think of as leaders, and the role that they actually can really play. And working with musicians, I think, has been a really special thing that we've begun doing recently. So I finally wanted to close out with the folks that actually often inspire us most, and that's with the youth that we work with. We have the privilege and honor to work with youth throughout the state of Minnesota, organizing them. Well, I hate to say organizing them, following them and trying to hold on as tight as we can as they lead us forward. Our Youth Environmental Activists of Minnesota program involves a core of leaders from throughout the state that meet weekly to discuss the issues at hand right now. I think they're doing a lot of thinking just about how to organize online and what that means. They represent the Youth Climate Strike, both locally and nationally, Fridays for the Future, and are doing a lot of important work at their schools, but also have been involved with things like the writing of Minnesota's Green New Deal last year. And so they're important leaders in their own right. And every year they put on a climate summit at the Capitol where they bring together youth from around the state, usually 200, 250 of them, to learn about speaking to their legislators, and then they each meet with the folks that are representing their districts. And in February this year, we had, I think, meetings with over 100 leaders, and we had 250 kids from around the state. Governor Walz came and spoke with them, and as well as a number of commissioners in years past as well, and Governor Dayton, and even Pawlenty way back when. Looking at time, I'm not going to share the video about them, but it's a fun one. You can look at it later. It's the summary of their work. So when we talk with folks about what kind of action should we be taking, I mean, obviously that's a question we're all asking, what should we do? Something I think that's really simple and important, and a way to look at it is think about how you can use your voice, how you can use your choice, and how you can use your vote. I've talked a lot about voice tonight. It's something that should really not be put on the back burner. How do you talk to people in your lives about this? And as well as people that are not in your lives, but maybe should be. How do you write to your legislators? How do you connect with your leaders that aren't necessarily at even a state level, but your school boards and your commissioners? There's many important roles that are to be played. Choices, think about the actions you're taking. Tell other people, and how do you scale those actions up to a more collective action? How do you take something you're doing as an individual and make it more of a collective action? How do you take those choices? And then finally, of course, voting. And as I mentioned, it doesn't necessarily, of course, as we look ahead, the presidential election looms before us, but the local level elections are absolutely integral. And I think we're seeing that playing out actually right now through the crisis that we're in, the importance of local and state level leadership when we're in times of crisis. Just so you all know, some things to look ahead for. We've got an amazing lineup for Earth Day, which you can join from anywhere in the world. And we've got some great speakers coming in. Some of them you saw in that video. Gold medalist Jessie Diggins is my favorite as a Nordic skier. But we also have some other fantastic folks coming in to us for that. We've got a podcast. If you're a podcast person, I know a lot of folks are right now, especially. We have 2 episodes and another one coming, thinking about this idea of how do we take music and spoken word and turn it into action. Our Teacher Institute's coming up. It will be going virtual. You're the first to know that. And that will be in July, and more information there. And follow us on social media, because why not? With that, I think I used my time appropriately. I will unshare my screen if that's what you want me to do, Corey, correct? Yep. And mute myself.
Alrighty, so I think I can motion for everyone that we can do a virtual round of applause for all of our presenters, both in person and on video. Thank you for being here. And so what we're going to do for the next, we have until 7 o'clock. And basically, I'll ask for folks in the audience if you want to go ahead and submit your questions via the chat, and I will read those out to the panelists. I want to note that maybe if you have questions for Winona, that if you could put those up first, because she can be with us till 6:30. So I'll see if any questions come in here, and otherwise I have some prepared. I guess I'll go ahead and start, and maybe I'll have Winona answer first and we can hear from everyone. But you've told us about 3 more good steps that people can take around the state to be working on climate solutions. Are there any other solutions that you would add, things that you didn't have time to talk about in your videos or presentations, or things that you'd like to share to inspire folks? So Winona, would you like to take that? You're muted.
Are we good now?
Yeah. How are you doing there, Jay Drake?
Hi, Winona.
Nice to see you.
Great to see you.
Yes, I'm looking forward to catching up. It was so great to hear what you had to say, Kristen, and it's just really so good to hear what people are thinking, So just to give a little update, yeah, I just did see the video, and we're doing a lot more. So right now, we're in the sugar bush. There's a really, Minnesota in our territory, if you take care of the land will take care of you. And so we're out in the woods with our first maple harvest, which is kind of like the Ojibwe New Year. Happy New Year to all of you. Happy New Year. And in that, I want to say that, I'm encouraging people. They used to have them victory gardens. I think resilience gardens. Maybe we should call them that. The complicated mess and bad decisions we got ourselves into with spending so much energy importing stuff from places we shouldn't import from, that's just a bad idea. And, I think that seed companies are finding that this is one of the biggest, that this is a huge boom. Everybody around the country is buying seeds. So I'm encouraging people to rebuild local food systems, find out who your local people are, get local in our energy, because the relationship between energy and food is pretty significant. And then, so us over at Anishinaabe Ag, we're going to grow out a lot more food in these resilience gardens and help in our communities. That's going to be a full court press, I tell you, this summer. And then the other thing I want to say is that, and I'm working on is hemp. I call that the new green revolution. In Minnesota, unfortunately, brought the green revolution to the world with a lot of bags saddled to it. And so now here's our opportunity to have the new green revolution, which could be cannabis or hemp. And I'm a fiber hemp grower. And I think that anything you make out of plastic, you could pretty much make out of hemp, but we should probably not make all that stuff anyway. Like, just cut some of that plastic. Just get more efficient. Now, Jay Drake, I didn't get to hear too much about what you're saying, but that the things I think about is that really we need to shift our energy systems. Enbridge is the single largest energy consumer in the state of Minnesota. How could that be? It turns out that moving sludge across the state takes a lot of power. And so all of this dirty generation we have is for a lot of it's for stupid projects we shouldn't continue. And I looked at this opportunity now. I always think of, I don't always think of crisis as opportunity, but it is. When you get that big slap and you're like, whoa, wow, I made a lot of bad decisions. Maybe I should make sure not everything, 70% of my pharmaceuticals aren't manufactured in China, and all my goods and services and parts are parts that I need for all my other, all my equipment and all my food. Maybe I should localize that. And I see this as the opportunity for Governor Walz. This is your time to shine. Get those, give us something better than those jobs on the Iron Range mining 1% ore. get us some renewable energy. And I know Jay Drake has the full plan for that one. I got some good gardening ideas, but you know, I think this is just this great opportunity. And you know, I see it happening at communities. I don't see, sadly, I don't see the kind of vision coming from political leadership. But I see it coming from communities and a lot of learned people out there working. And so, you know, I just want to thank everybody for their good hard work.
Thank you. Jay and Kristen, do you want to offer any thoughts on that question before we take another one?
Come on, don't be shy.
If not, we could, another thing that has come up, which kind of Winona almost segued into, would be, you know, as we're all slowing down in response to COVID-19, we're seeing improved air and water quality around the world, and just, you know, the Earth's resilience. Are there lessons we can learn from this experience that will help us become more resilient in the future while also reducing our climate impacts? So Winona mentioned a couple, but if you want to expand on that, or if the other panelists would like to respond.
I had pasted in the chat box if people want to. We've been thinking a lot about this, the COVID and climate connections just for teachers right now that are entering. We've been doing a lot of support for teachers that are having to go virtual around the world, obviously. Having had some questions of that early on, what are the connections? And you can look at that on many different levels, but one of the things we know we have to be really careful about is talking about this is yes, of course, we're seeing resilience in our systems as we step back, but it's at, you know, the cost of people and lives and communities. And so looking at like benefits of this crisis we're in from that perspective is a really dangerous road to go down. I think if you look at it though, thematically, the things that we can learn from, even I saw something today talking about flattening the climate curve and how do we think about things more this way, and what can we learn about taking a step back and for a moment, which we're all doing, and having that kind of opportunity. But I pasted in the link to some of the articles we've looked at and some of the questions that have come up with that, if people are interested in using that. And that's a toolkit that's just online and available.
Here's a one specific for you, Winona, from one of my students. It says, what is the value of Indigenous knowledge for solving the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, you know, I mean, a couple things. I was thinking about what the UN climate change, Inger Anderson at the United Nations said. And she's talking about that, you know, you're going to have more of these pandemics because of the you know, overloading of humans on ecosystems and roughshod capitalism destroying so many places, you know, that there's this, you know, that the number of pandemics is just going to increase because you're getting animals out of places, they're stressed out, they're losing habitat, and you know, so that's how this is going to keep going on, is what she said. You know, and so what we learn is a couple things. One, you know, Indigenous people for a long time, you know, we're about 5% of the world's population protecting 75% of the world's biodiversity. 5% of the world's population protecting 75% of the world's biodiversity. I think of where I live as where the wild things are. And you want to keep it that way, basically. You got to keep wild places wild, because if they aren't wild, things go bad. You know, so we've been saying that for a long time, you know, is that we got to kind of lay low, you know, not be such a menace to the earth. You know, in our sugar bush right now, when, you know, we still have some snow, we're losing our snow, but a long time ago, you know, it was said that the Anishinaabe, we were pretty slack too. There was this period of time, I just want to make sure that everybody knows that you know, nobody has a monopoly on doing stupid stuff. Every society is capable of doing stupid stuff, okay? So way back in the day, we were doing some stupid stuff, and you know, the creator got kind of irritated at us and was like, I don't know, man, maybe we should ship these ones out. These guys aren't doing too much good stuff. And so, but the eagle was there, and the eagle came and said, give me a shot. Let me take a look and see if I could find any Anishinaabe doing something they're supposed to be doing, like enjoying the beautiful world, you know, making fine baskets, harvesting good food, being respectful. You know, so flies around, nothing. Comes back, head hanging. The eagle, she goes out the next day, she says, Creator, come on, give me another break. She said, 3 days, the Creator said. So second day, same thing, nothing. Third day, out there, eagle's flying around and sees some Anishinaabe people out there in the woods, some Indian grandma and a grandpa out there with their grandchildren in the sugar bush. And the Creator said, and the eagle went back and reported that some of us had not botched up our instructions, and so we could still hang around. And so I just want to say that, you know, don't do dumb stuff. And so now's our chance to kind of like reboot. I wanted to challenge, like I had this idea of doing like a resilience challenge, you know, because I'm pretty like low key, but I was, you know, people do this local food challenge. Well, let's up that to do like local energy and local food. Like if I had a set of bikes that I could hook up to the electronics in my house, I tell you what, you know, I got a bunch of kids, they could power the house. You know, I think that if we did that at science fairs, you know, if we really made it cool to generate local power and to be less of a menace to the earth, give Mother Earth a break year, that's my idea, you know, is, you know, it'd be a really great challenge because as you said, Corey, everything's so much healthier right now. You know, you can see, people are saying they could see the stars, you know, they could see the sun in China. Let's just say we want to keep it that way. And so now I think we start this really good education project and challenge industries too. Challenge businesses to come back better, like way better.
I'd like to make a pitch for building efficiency, because when we talk about climate action, the most important thing we do is take our action up to the scale of the problem as quickly as possible. That's really dragging on us now. And when we look around at buildings, most of the buildings that we have around here in 2050, when we're supposed to be at net zero carbon, have been built already. So we're not going to build our way out of this. We have to renovate all of those buildings that are not efficient. And I think about that in two ways. I think about where the Fresh Energy legislative staff are at this week. They've been talking to legislators because we have a bill, can you believe it? A bipartisan bill supported by Republicans and Democrats that would make nursing homes across Minnesota more energy efficient. And why is that needed? Because nursing homes are in every size community. They are mostly not doing very well in their money situation, and many of them are not built terribly well. And by investing in making those nursing homes more efficient, the nursing homes have more money for medical staff and for staff to help their people. And we're really looking to see that move forward yet this year. And it's very interesting because nursing homes have been in people's crosshairs in a number of ways over the COVID virus. And it's not their fault. Nursing homes are in bad shape in a lot of smaller communities, and that's where we need to invest more in them. Another way I think about buildings is happening here in my city of St. Paul. So St. Paul looked at every of the smallest political districts in St. Paul and made a map of those neighborhoods. And what they were mapping is how much of their income do houses in those neighborhoods spend on energy. And what they found is that in a whole lot of neighborhoods in St. Paul, people spend about 1 or 2% of their income on energy. But if you look at the map, you can see big red areas where people in buildings are spending as much as 7% of their energy, 7 times more than most of the people in St. Paul. And that is really pressing those families. And they can't keep up with it. So where do we need to go for action? We need to go, the first thing we did in fighting climate change in Minnesota, before we ever talked about it as climate action, was in like 1990, when we passed one of the country's first law requiring utilities to invest in making buildings more energy efficient. And the result is, it has worked. It has worked for the richer people especially, and the middle class people pretty well, and terribly for the lower resourced people. And what we found is energy efficiency, you can improve energy efficiency in a building. The statewide says, well, you can improve it almost 2% every year. So we should be making those kinds of investments, but we need the legislature to focus the money from the utilities, focus it on lower resourced families. And so there are several bills being discussed this year, and they need to get passed sooner rather than later to help all of these people who are suffering. And here's the prize they can think about. I was talking this morning to a class at your school, and I was talking about one utility is now in the process. They have set retirement dates for 100% of their coal-fired power plants. That means in less than 10 years, they're going to run their electric company without any coal. Every other utility should be required to do that as well. And one of these coal plants they're closing down by 2028 is in a horrible place for a coal plant. Maybe you've seen it if you've ever been kayaking on the St. Croix River. You're going by a very large coal plant. It's called the King Plant. And guess what beauty there was in learning that horrible facility is going to be retired in a few years. They don't need to replace it with any natural gas. They don't need to replace it with any other industry, because we have saved enough energy from energy efficiency that we are going to make up for the King Plant from only energy efficiency investments that already exist. That's good news, but what that should make us do is always question the next decision. Because if that happened for the case of one coal plant, it can happen for more if we invest more in energy efficient. So we should think about all those other opportunities, all those opportunities that are before us that we are not yet taking advantage of.
Thank you. So maybe one last question for Winona before she has to sign off would be, people are wondering how they can support advocacy. We know that, to solve climate change, we need to stop using fossil fuels and transporting them via pipeline. So what can people do to stand in solidarity with Native people resisting the Line 3 pipeline at this current moment?
Good you asked me that. Okay, so this is where we are in the regulatory process. In February, the Public Utilities Commission reissued the Certificate of Need and their route permit for Line 3. Now, that was the bad thing to do, but we were expecting that because that's how they make bad decisions. But one commissioner dissented on that. They're supposed to have issued, at this point, their opinion or their decision formally for the record. And after they issue their decision formally for the record, then we appeal it or ask to have them reconsider it. And that hasn't happened at all. It's totally unheard of. They've been sitting on announcing their decision for 2 months now, and we have heard nothing. So we don't know, where that is in the process. We know that that process is stayed for now. But at the same time, the MPCA, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, decided it should go ahead with the hearings on Line 3. Our tribal chairman and a lot of other people wrote a letter and said, you have a pandemic. You can't have hearings on the single most, largest water quality permits that would be issued in the state of Minnesota, for something of this size. You can't have hearings for that. So they canceled the public hearings, and then they decided to go to video hearings. There's one tonight. It's a call-in to, they have a call-in number. And, you can also on Thursday between 10 and 11:30, they'll let you call into the MPCA, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. I'll make sure that we send you the link for it, or if you've got it, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, you can call it between 10 and 11:30 and tell them, why you don't think this is a good idea to issue the permits for the pipeline. Now, I want to say that Enbridge has been lobbying really hard, calling people across the state, actually making calls from Canada, to get people to come out and testify for the pipeline. But the reason that they're doing that is because, one, they really want it, but two, the price of oil has fallen apart, and refineries are closing down, and Enbridge today actually began running has empty lines. There's no oil being moved because we cut consumption of oil during the pandemic. And so the oil industry is falling apart. The tar sands are canceling mining projects, big mining projects. Syncrude, the largest processor in the world, cut production and cut one of its refineries down. And so the oil industry is in a big panic. Just to be clear, the price of Canadian oil is at this point, it's cheaper to buy a barrel of Canadian oil than it is to buy a barrel of monkeys, that little game. Did I say that? Did y'all get that? It's cheaper to buy a barrel of Canadian oil than to buy a barrel of monkeys, that little game. And so I'm telling y'all that why it's so crazy, because it costs $82 a barrel to shove it in a pipe and then use all this energy to get it down and produce all this CO2. It's a really bad idea. It was a really bad idea 7 years ago, and it's the worst idea now. So Enbridge is trying to push this through before the entire fossil fuels industry falls apart. And one thing I just want to say to the people of Minnesota, which we told the governor, Enbridge intends to bring 4,300 workers to 7 camps in northern Minnesota. 7 different locations in northern Minnesota, most of them next to our reservations. They want to bring 4,300 workers in. And our feeling is that is a really bad idea in a global pandemic. And that Enbridge should just, everything should just chill out now. They shouldn't get their permit anyway, but the governor should stop the process because we have a pandemic. Enbridge doesn't get a pipeline in the middle of a pandemic, because be for sure, 4,300 Enbridge workers is a health hazard to Minnesota. So call the MPCA, call the governor, say stop line 3, and tell them we want a real regulatory process, not a call-in phone that you'd be lucky if you get to be heard because Enbridge has control of the line. Anyway, just saying, Winona, the water protector, would really like the system to work. I'm like all for making the system work. Let's go. I think, ladies, we got to really, and a gentleman, Kyle, there, cool dude. I really think that we got to make sure that the people's movement and these non-NGOs, all of us work together to keep pushing the legislature and everybody else, but make the Green New Deal. That's what we need to do. We need the solution, because obviously, if you let those guys make decisions on their own, they don't make good decisions. So we need good decisions for the future. Anyway, I know I'm getting that from my other team because I got to go do some other stuff, but thank you all for letting me hang with you. Nice to see you. Some of you I just met for the first time. Kyle, we didn't get to visit. You look awesome. Are you in your kitchen or in a lab?
His kitchen.
Kitchen? It's kind of like a lab behind you or something,
Alrighty, well, thank you very much, Winona, for joining us.
Yes, thanks for having me. Best to y'all.
Yep. All right, so here's another question that you both could address. Someone asked, what is one small thing that each of you would recommend that you can do every day to make a difference for climate change?
Well, there's so much you could do. One of the best things to do now that a lot of people are already doing is, because there's no place open you can drive to, but there's every place you can walk to or bike to. And that is even being encouraged by Governor Walz. So doing more motion with your body is the cheapest, it's absolutely free, and it's fun. And a lot of people are doing it in my neighborhood. I'm sure they're doing it in yours too.
Coincidentally, Jay and I are a half a block away from each other right now. So they really are doing it in our neighborhood. Yeah, I mean, I always go back to talking about climate change and normalizing that conversation, because it sounds so simple and silly, but it's just bringing it up over and over and making it something normal that we talk about, and figuring out what your ask is. I mean, there's pieces to that. What is your take? What is your connection to it, and what is your ask of those around you that relates to them or to your world? So there's a million other things, you know, I talked about it, but talking about it, and if it's every day, that's something to do. Commit to talking about it.
And I think the other thing we all can do every day is work with existing coalitions. Sometimes they're very non-official coalitions. They're organic. And an organic coalition called Clean Cars Minnesota is working to help address the problem that Winona was talking about. Tar sands, the very dirty tar sands coming into Minnesota, where a lot of that tar sand goes to the Flint Hills refinery near South St. Paul and provides most of the fuel that goes into our cars, unless we have electric cars. So you may not want to think about it, but it's the demand for the product that is going to be here throughout the US. There's going to be more demand for gasoline to go in cars. And we know that's true even in Minnesota. In Minnesota, one of the sectors that is producing greenhouse gas emissions, that is increasing its emissions, is transportation. And a lot of that is because, as of last year, 70% of the motor vehicles that were sold in Minnesota, bought by Minnesotans, were SUVs or pickup trucks. Now, I don't think people are going to change away from those styles of vehicles automatically, but it's interesting when electric vehicle companies are starting to set a point in time, some cases less than a year or 2 years away, when they will be manufacturing electric pickup trucks. So what we need to do is jump on Tim Walz's bandwagon, where he has said, you know what? And he said this in September 2019. He said, we are not going to wait on the legislature to act on this. Minnesota is deciding to join California car standards, zero emission vehicles and low emission vehicles. And the number one thing that we'll do after that regulation gets written by the end of 2020, so we can see it, is vehicle manufacturers will be required to sell every vehicle that's electric that they produce. They also must provide them to be sold in Minnesota, because currently there's about twice as many kinds of electric vehicles that have never even been seen in Minnesota, because all of their vehicles go to California and go to Massachusetts and go to New York. And we need to get those cars here, because it's not a case of requiring people to buy electric vehicles, but to test drive them, kick the tires, see how they're doing in their, how many miles they can take us. And especially when people see the feeling, and this is true of about 90% of the electric vehicle drivers in Minnesota that I know, and there are 13,000 electric vehicles in Minnesota, 90% of their drivers tell me they have never taken them to a gas station because they always fill them with zero carbon electricity in their own garage. Wouldn't that feel like a good thing? I think most people feel like it would. And people are really chomping at the bit for more variety of electric vehicles, which are coming out all the time. But we need to take some proactive action in Minnesota. I'm delighted that our governor is taking the lead, and you're going to have a chance to provide a comment on that program, and it's going to happen sometime this summer. And that's definitely one thing that you should do in a couple of weeks, where that public comment is generally wanted. And we have to make sure that we fill all of those email boxes with positive comments for providing Minnesota consumers a choice of electric vehicles.
Thank you. So we know that this is really hard work, thinking about climate crisis, acting on climate crisis. How do, what keeps both of you going? Like, what is your source of inspiration and motivation that keeps you putting all your energies into this effort?
Oh, right now it's so everything's hard right now. It's a hard one to answer. As far so personal, I feel like right now. I mean, I've said my family and children, and I am a nature lover, and the thought of losing that is kills me. I think the place where I find the most personal, where I feel most personally attacked by this issue, and is in winter. I love winter, and in winters when we don't have them are just a really hard place to be as someone who does this work, I would say, because it's constantly in your face that this is happening. And so it's a very personal take on it, I think, but I love being creative. This is a hyper collaborative space, I would say. We are all working on something that needs to get done right now. And so the partnerships that are created by working on climate change engagement and education and working with youth is like hyper collaborative, I would say, more than any other space I've ever worked in. And so I think that's another driver, is just those partnerships and the people that they're in this because they've got passion for it. So yeah. Jay?
What keeps me going is that it has never been more necessary to address climate change, but never has it been more possible. There are so many things we can do that will save us money today and have wonderful numbers of co-benefits. And I think because of this change in the economics of renewable energy, I am now positive that we're going to beat this problem. And I go to work every day energized because I see almost every week there's a winning position that we can identify that has happened in Minnesota or it's happened in a neighboring state. And that means there's so much more we can do. And I never feel defeated by it, and I'm never depressed by it. I'm energized by it because it means moving to a clean energy transformation that is being good for everyone. And it's something that wasn't possible 20 years ago, certainly wasn't possible 50 years ago. But now that it is possible, it is in our sights, and we need to buckle down and work harder. But the work is fun because we are winning.
please keep the questions coming in if you have them. I guess we've got some kind of like specific questions, so I'll put them all out there and see what you all would like to tackle. So one is, what is the fastest way to curb our carbon emissions? So driving, flying, eating less meat, shopping at thrift stores, what would be like one thing people should start? That's one question. Another is, how can a homeowner and a driver of a gas-powered vehicle have the most impact? And a third would be the challenges related to materials for renewable, for electrification and renewable energy. So how can we make sure that these materials are mined sustainably, depending on where they're coming from, that there's justice involved in the people who are producing these materials for this energy transition? So if you'd like to tackle any of those questions, please go ahead.
Well, definitely the biggest thing we should do is in energy efficiency and renewable energy. So I know now that most people have already switched out all their light bulbs from CFLs to LEDs. And if you know of any light bulbs, or like I see one on my neighbor's front porch, not an LED light bulb, but a compact fluorescent. And I always go over and talk to that guy and give him a new light bulb. And if I can get him to switch it in right that day, it'll be a benefit for the whole neighborhood immediately. Same thing is true for renewable electricity. Renewable electricity is getting dirt cheap. It's now the cheapest source of any generation in Minnesota. So we need to switch a lot more of our uses to running on renewable electricity. And for people who are thinking of owning a home some year, or in a family that owns a home, you should be looking at how your hot water is made hot and how your heat is provided, and start thinking out a plan to get to using a heat pump to very efficiently produce hot water and hot air, and plan for the time when you're going to switch away your appliances that run on natural gas to ones that run on renewable energy. And in fact, even the investors, you've heard about the firm BlackRock. Sounds kind of dirty, doesn't it? But it's just an investment corporation. And they are now sending out public messages to inform owners of companies and say, if you are in a company that is planning on investing more in fossil fuels, you are putting your investors at risk. And you need to really go back and rethink that strategy. And that's a very interesting messenger for that.
Yeah, I didn't, that is not my field of expertise, probably most of those questions, but the one thing that I have learned a little bit about recently, which I think is fascinating, is there is, obviously some pushback always about the materials needed for renewables, and that involves mining, and how do we do that part sustainably. And there's been some really interesting research on urban mining. Rupali Phadke at Macalester College has been doing, which I'd encourage folks to dig into a little bit, just that it's actually a real falsehood that we need to be mining minerals, that there's a lot of them, and there's some in Europe, some locations where they're actually really doing this. So I think there's some papers out there. I put a link to the page where she starts, to Rupali's page there to dig into it. It's interesting research.
All right, so here's another one for us. There seems to be a tension between solving climate change using our current capitalist system versus building a new governmental system from the ground up. Is there a need for structural change in order to properly address climate change?
Too bad Winona's not here anymore. I know she'd be awesome at answering this. And any of the youth that we work with in our youth program would also, and they would say absolutely. In part, that's I think why Winona had mentioned the Green New Deal, because it does look at things from a different way and a different way of structuring our economy and structuring our political systems. But the current system is what got us, let's just, to put it simply, the current system is what got us to where we are right now. So thinking about how that system got us here and what worked and what didn't work is important, and a really good, when we talk about climate change and when we talk about the cause, it isn't just a science lesson, that's a political and social and economic lesson as well. So the causes, the impacts, and the solutions all lie in all of those dimensions.
Well, I would answer that by saying we always can improve the structure of any political system, and we should always do that. However, I don't think we need to drown the capitalism system in order to solve the climate problem. First of all, we don't have time to do that. And second of all, think about what capitalism, the heart of capitalism is, and how that has been improved when it comes to energy. So for example, in Minnesota's regulated energy system, we have now for almost 20 years, we've looked at the cost of climate and the cost of carbon dioxide. And we include that in looking at the all costs of every source of energy. So it's a way to put a thumb on the scale and give the benefit to the zero carbon technologies. And that is something that is happening because of the capitalism system. And we need to only look around at the plummeting cost of first wind power, and now even more so, the plummeting cost of solar energy. And this is what has led the biggest utility in Minnesota to say, we're going to stop burning coal. So that's a very positive, result. So what we need to think about when we think about politicians is that we have some really great politicians in the Minnesota legislature. I don't know if you were watching what the House of Representatives was doing in 2019, but they were busy passing very good climate bills. And so we need to worry about the relatively few, but sometimes not terribly few, politicians who are making the wrong decisions. And we need to elect better politicians. But we should never throw out all the politicians, because we have some great politicians in every state in the United States. And you need to support the good ones and try to shape the rest of them or vote them out.
Thank you. So kind of, building on that political level, we have a question. As Minnesota's political leaders seek to guide us out of the pandemic and to restart our economy, what policy priorities should we be promoting to them? Is a state level Green New Deal enough to involve, or is it going to involve enough workers, or should we think even bigger? Kind of what would, what's the feasibility of something like a Green New Deal versus an economic overhaul?
Well, I like something different than the Green New Deal, because I don't think that has taken off yet. There are plenty of really great components of that, but there are components of other ideas too that we need more of, that essentially look at the very gapping problem we have of equity problems all over our society, that we have the lowest resourced people are suffering in our new clean economy and in our old clean economy, and we need to fix that, definitely. But we need I never like any solution that has one piece to it, because I don't think those exist. I don't think those will be ideally as resilient as really buckling down and saying, we need to change how the economies work in every sector of our economy. And we need to make sure and keep our focus on the least resourced people in our society and make sure that they are helped the most. And we're going to need dozens of policies to do that. And it's not going to be passed in one package. It's going to be passed incrementally in our system, but that's okay. That's how we've done things in the past. But we need to keep at it. And I even use Minnesota as a good example of this, because I saw a lot of great legislators, some of whom had just been elected in 2018 to the Minnesota House. And they made wonderful progress. But then they ran into the Minnesota Senate, which wasn't interested in taking up any of the issues that had been passed by their comrades in the House. And what I'm telling everyone, Democrat and Republican, is we need to do much more. We don't need a state that puts all of its eggs in one basket for a year and maybe takes 3 years to pass a policy. We really need to be working at the same time, dozens of new policies. And they're probably not going to all be packaged in one piece of legislation that has a fancy name, because they are being done by a lot of different committees in each state's legislature. And the really missing part is to have committees in the federal legislature interested in doing anything yet. So we need to be doing more policies and not to do one thing a year and then maybe dream about doing another thing in the next year. We need more people working on this, and we need more citizens demanding that it happen. So thank you if you're doing that.
Yeah, and I would just add, I put something in the chat there too, that I know that we are all tapped emotionally right now, and that's okay, but we do, and it's very difficult, I would say, to be able to message climate change right now in this particular moment in history, to feel like we're being genuine to a crisis that's already at hand. But there are interests, fossil fuel interests, that are taking advantage of our vulnerability right now to push through some nasty things. And so if you have the chutzpah to educate yourself a little bit and be aware of that and continue to advocate on this issue, do it. And if you don't have the chutzpah, be gentle on yourself. It's okay, because like I said, we are in something big right now. And I put a link to just the most recent podcast. I recommend Heated or if you like things a little raw once in a while when you read it. Emily Aiken has been writing and now has a podcast, and she just did an interview looking at some of these things that are happening right now. If you do want to educate yourself a little bit more, it's a great thing to listen to and a great thing to read. She comes into your inbox every day or once or twice a week. So.
All right, so we have just 2 minutes remaining. So in that time, what can a brief idea maybe on how can we celebrate gains together and recharge, especially during this health crisis? And Kristen, maybe, are there artists that we should be looking out for and supporting in this?
Supporting artists would be something to do right now for sure. They're having a hard time. Yeah, leaning into each other and I mean, our podcast is pretty hopeful. If you want to listen to the interviewing with artists, there's 2 hours of your time you could kill with that. Remaining hopeful that I think there's been some really lovely, there's one in particular, and I don't know if anyone's seen it. It's called Pandemic Poem, maybe. I'm sure many have seen it, but recognizing that this pause we're taking, that maybe we'll be able to hold on to some of the things we're learning and take advantage of that, and remember that, and maybe challenge ourselves to remember that. I think this is a time to maybe reboot a little bit too, if we're not in an ill place, and connect to people. I mean, coming on this webinar and seeing faces, even if they're not face to face, and continuing to educate yourself. It's interesting to be, for the very first time, as someone who works in this field, I feel like everyone understands what I feel on a daily basis, like what a crisis is, and what it feels like to know that a crisis is happening. But for the first time also be in something that maybe is taken a little bit on the back burner, like the current crisis at hand is almost more urgent, which is very stark contrast. So learning from being in this and taking hope from that.
And I'm very, very supportive of going to the internet at this time when that's all a lot of us have, for seeing some of the beautiful and energetic arts that are on the internet. But I want to tell you, if you want to be more convinced about doing the right thing and taking climate action, find something in climate action that has some data to it, and learn some of the data and make it big data like this. 2 examples. I mentioned that Minnesota now has 13,000 electric vehicles registered in our state, but their butt is being kicked by those people who are buying and driving SUVs and pickups. So Minnesota now has a goal. Talk to the PCA about this. Their goal is by 2030 to have 200,000 electric vehicles in Minnesota. So construct a dashboard on your computer and follow it. But another thing that's happening right now is 2 of our coal plants in Minnesota this year, they're not going to wait for 10 years when they retire. This year, they're going to start ceasing operations for 6 months of every year for the next 8 years. And that will save in Minnesota 5 million tons of CO2 emissions that will not be emitted every year. So write that number down, 5 million tons of CO2 not coming out of 2 coal plants, and add that up for 8 years and see what it comes out to. And it will be amazing, and it will propel you forward.
All right, well, thank you so much to J.J. Hamilton and Kristen Poppleton for staying with us here till the end and answering questions. Thank you to all of the members of the audience who submitted your questions, and I apologize if we didn't get to some of them. But please continue taking action for climate justice in all of the ways that you can and that you learned about tonight. And as some of, we've got the link posted in the chat right now. The Solve Climate by 2030 website has a lot of resources for educators and other folks to learn more about this. And then of course you can visit the websites of our panelists to learn more about the work they're doing and how you can support that. So with that, I'll say thank you, and I hope everyone has a great night and a healthy spring. We'll give a round of applause again to maybe our people here.
Thank you.